Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're not just opening a cold case.
Right.
We are tearing apart a meticulously constructed house of horrors, brick by false brick.
That's a good way to put it.
We're taking a journey into a really specific 1941 investigation. It was led by the brilliant Mrs. Bradley, and it features this stack of contradictory sources. We've got interview transcripts, police notes, and a personal diary that all combine into one of the most baffling and I think ultimately tragic criminal cover-ups we've ever looked at.
Our mission today is really to follow the truth that's hidden under all these layers of deception. There's supernatural fraud, a complex web of, familial greed. We're analyzing how one seemingly cursed house on the English coast, a place called Nonsuch, became the center point for 4 separate crimes.
4. That's a lot to unpack.
It is. It resulted in 3 confirmed murders and 1 fake death. So our goal is to pull out those aha moments by contrasting the clean, polished narrative of the accused, which is the diary, against the messy, difficult, and contradictory reality that was reported by all the witnesses.
So it's a pure exercise in structural analysis, really. Finding the truth in the gaps.
Exactly.
That's a heavy list of crimes, so
Yeah.
let's unpack this right away.
Mhm.
We begin the story far from the coast at the Drury Shafton Institution for Delinquent Boys. Mrs. Bradley is initially there for a completely different reason.
Right. She's there to apply her unique brand of psychological treatment. And, much to the warden's astonishment, it actually works.
What was the specific problem she was brought in for?
She was brought in primarily because 2 boys had run away a week earlier, and the authorities were facing some really intense public scrutiny. She used her word associations technique. It's a method of psychological inquiry that probes the subconscious to retrieve hidden memories and connections.
And it worked.
It did. She successfully traced both runaways within 2 days. Her method was, well, simple but effective. She just got the boys to talk about what they really wanted, not just their surface-level complaints.
And while her success was a major win for the institution, it only served to amplify the warden's existing anxieties. He was apparently haunted by the memory of 2 other boys who had vanished years earlier.
Yes, just before his appointment, and they were never found.
And that cost his predecessor his job.
Exactly. The earlier disappearance had been a quiet disaster. The previous warden was sacked because it was really strongly suspected that the escape of those 2 boys had been assisted or maybe even engineered by the staff member.
An inside job.
An inside job, essentially. The accomplice was never identified, but the suspicion just lingered like a bad smell. The current warden was dealing with the moral fallout from that, and he noted that the boys were constantly reminded they were here as a punishment.
Which Mrs. Bradley would have hated.
Oh, she instantly recognized it as a terribly immoral state of affairs. She knew it just bred resentment and, facilitated conspiracy.
So the institution's dark history becomes this unexpected source for our crucial lead. The warden may be feeling relieved by her success or just eager to deflect. He gets chatty.
He gets very chatty. And he provides this intriguing address. He tells her about Nonsuch, a seaside house that had belonged to the aunt of a former housekeeper named Bella Foxley.
And this is the name at the center of everything, Bella Foxley.
This is the critical juncture where all these disparate threads start to knot together. This housekeeper, Bella Foxley, she inherits money when her aunt dies, immediately faces a murder trial, gets acquitted, and then supposedly commits suicide because, and this is a quote, "People were so unkind."
Right. The warden describes the whole thing as something out of a cheap novel.
He does. A scandal with sudden wealth, a murder, a ghost-ridden house.
But for Mrs. Bradley, this isn't fiction. This haunted house is the precise key she needs. Why is she so sure this is the connection?
Because it directly links the suspicious housekeeper from the institution, the same place where 2 boys vanished without a trace, with this sequence of highly convenient deaths, an acquittal, a quick suicide, and a property that's now available to rent.
It's too neat.
Way too neat. The local ghost stories about Nonsuch aren't random. They are, as we discover, the exact cover story for the entire criminal operation. So the mission is set.
She rents the house for the summer.
So Mrs. Bradley rents Nonsuch. She does it under the pretense of running a holiday scheme for the boys. It's a plan the authorities swiftly vetoed, but it worked. It allowed her to gain access.
And the breakthrough doesn't come from police work. It comes from her philosophical grandson, Derek, who was just supposed to be working on his holiday scrapbook.
Exactly. And Derek finds the cornerstone of the entire investigation. A thick, stiff-covered diary, 6 years out of date, hidden away in a cupboard.
And this diary is presented as the primary source, right?
Yeah.
It's the internal monologue of the main suspect, Bella Foxley.
That's how it appears. The document is immediately revealing. It's written in this neat, legible hand, almost surprisingly so, and it establishes Bella Foxley as a 47-year-old woman who was the cook housekeeper at the institution.
But it's her worldview that really jumps off the page.
It really does. She is highly cynical and seems entirely motivated by financial gain. She openly discusses an expected inheritance of £2,000 a year, and she notes, very acidly, that her Aunt Flora was too long-lived.
I just want to pause on that phrase. Too long-lived. It's such a cold, clinical way to talk about a relative. It establishes her frame of mind before the death even happens.
Oh, absolutely.
It suggests she saw her aunt not as family, but as a financial obstacle.
It's very deliberate character crafting. The diary positions her as this detached, almost professional observer of her own greed. She documents her Aunt Flora's failing health after a serious fall, and she describes the aunt's recovery of consciousness as too wonderfully disappointing.
Wow, wonderfully disappointing.
Yes, this is all designed to show the reader, maybe a judge or a jury down the line, that she was just documenting her emotions, not causing the events.
And that sets the stage for the crucial event, the first confirmed death. Bella documents it on January 31st. Tell us about the exact, chilling details she provides of Aunt Flora's final moments.
Well, the diary account is just a masterpiece of self-exoneration. Bella writes that at precisely 7 p.m., the 81-year-old aunt, who was frail but had temporarily recovered, sat up and in her normal voice asked for some grated carrot.
Grated carrot.
Yeah. Bella claims that because the elderly live-in servant, a woman named Eliza Hodge, was at chapel for her weeknight meeting miles away in Rattleton, she, Bella, had to prepare the carrot herself on a nutmeg grater.
Okay, so the only other person in the house is conveniently miles away.
Conveniently absent. And the description of the death itself is chillingly brief. She writes, she had scarcely taken a third mouthful when she must have choked and fallen back dead. Cousin Tom Turney was supposedly there, attempting resuscitation afterward.
And just like that, the inheritance is secured. But this perfect self-serving narrative is the very first thing Mrs. Bradley zeroes in on. The moment she starts comparing this polished, almost literary account against external testimony,
The whole thing just unravels.
the structural integrity of the diary just collapses.
It's always the small, specific details that doom the killer. Every single time. Mrs. Bradley goes and speaks to Eliza Hodge, the elderly servant who actually inherited the house and its contents.
And Eliza's testimony just rips holes in Bella's account.
It does, starting with the instrument of death, the grated carrot.
Why was the carrot so suspicious? Bella made it sound like a perfectly normal, if slightly eccentric, request from an old woman.
But Eliza found the request for raw grated carrot extraordinary. She described it as heathenish food for her mistress. Aunt Flora was not a raw food enthusiast, not a vegetarian. She had never in her life eaten raw carrot, especially not in her frail state.
So the diary's claim that the request was made in her normal voice as part of some routine is a complete fabrication.
It's a direct lie. It suggests pretty conclusively that Bella, who admitted preparing it, introduced this foreign, difficult-to-swallow food, knowing the risk it posed to a frail person who could easily choke.
So the diary tries to deflect blame onto the victim. Oh, and Flora was eccentric. She asked for this strange food, when in reality it was Bella who manufactured the means of death. That's cold.
It is calculated. And the second major lie completely undermines her attempt to create an alibi. Bella wrote that Eliza was conveniently at chapel for her weeknight meeting in the next town over.
Which wasn't true.
Not even close. Eliza not only confirms she is not a chapel goer, but she clarifies that her religious practice, whatever it was, would never have taken her miles away to Rattleton on a weekday evening.
Wait, I want to double-click on that. She didn't just lie about where Eliza was. She invented a religious devotion for her. That implies a high degree of premeditation.
Oh, absolutely.
Bella needed to ensure no one could question the exact sequence of events, especially the serving of that carrot.
Precisely. The goal was to establish a protected vacuum of time where the murder could occur, witnessed only by her accomplice, Cousin Tom. This structural analysis establishes beyond any reasonable doubt that the choking on grated carrot, which the diary paints as this unfortunate, sad accident, was the first likely murder.
And it was rooted entirely in Bella's greed for that inheritance.
It transforms the diary from a personal record into a carefully constructed piece of protective fiction. It was designed to mislead any future investigation.
And the contradictions don't stop there, do they? Bella was sloppy in other ways.
Yes, smaller details reinforce the deception. In her diary entry on February 7th, Bella notes that Aunt Flora's house was in the hands of an agent for a quick sale. This implies that she, as the main beneficiary, was controlling the assets.
But that wasn't true either.
Nope. Eliza Hodge confirms the house had been willed directly to her, the servant. Bella, as the chief inheritor of the money, surely must have known the property disposition. This inconsistency suggests that either the diary was written retroactively or it was designed by someone who only knew the big financial details, the £2,000, but was hazy on the minor assets, like the house deed.
The narrative is just entirely concerned with positioning Bella as a detached, almost judicial observer, never an active participant in the crime.
Exactly. And the moment Mrs. Bradley understands this, that the diary is fiction intended to create reasonable doubt, the entire nature of the investigation shifts. It's no longer about solving a mystery. It's about exposing a conspiracy. So following Aunt Flora's very convenient demise and Bella's quick inheritance, she resigns from the institution. She then joins her cousin, Tom Turney, at Nonsuch.
And Tom has rented the house specifically to use it for psychical research. He's a writer and an investigator in that field, right? Contributes articles and journals?
That's right. So Bella moves into the exact house that she now knows will be the perfect stage for their next scheme, exploiting the supernatural to make some money.
This is where the poltergeist activity begins in earnest. And it's all meticulously documented, both in Bella's diary and in Tom's extensive journal notes.
The phenomena are classic poltergeist manifestations, and they escalate very quickly. They're clearly designed to draw attention from the wider psychical research community.
What kind of things were they reporting?
Well, Bella's diary describes finding a small perpetual calendar from her dressing table displaced out in the hall. She hears slippered footsteps. The bells in the house start ringing constantly, even after Tom, in frustration, had cut all the bell wires.
Tom's excitement must have been palpable. This was proof for his articles, right? He must have been thrilled.
Absolutely ecstatic. His journal entries recorded the climax of these early phenomena. A seance attended by several noted psychical researchers. Suddenly, they hear this crash overhead. They go to inspect, and they find that all the furniture in the spare bedroom has been violently overturned. The electric light flex had been damaged. Tom's journal recorded this triumphantly. A truly marvelous experience, the proof we have been waiting for.
He's buying it completely.
Hook, line, and sinker. He immediately started chalking rings around every movable object to track further activity. He effectively turned Nonsuch into a living laboratory for fraud.
But this deception turns deadly for Tom himself. And here's a key piece of timing that just screams manipulation. Bella's diary abruptly stops on March 19th.
And Tom dies just 3 days later on March 22nd after a fatal fall from a bedroom window. And this was actually the second such incident.
The second fall.
The first one happened on March 11th. Bella documented visiting Tom late that night, supposedly speaking to him from outside the window and then leaving. The next morning, he was found hurt. He attributed it to a fall.
And the second fall was the fatal one.
Right. And critically, the police investigation and the trial that followed gathered medical evidence suggesting Tom sustained a significant blow to the head that was struck before he ever hit the ground.
Which strongly indicates murder, not a suicide or an accident.
Exactly. And that leads us directly to the sensational trial of Bella Foxley for Tom's murder. Now, we know she was acquitted, and the sources attribute this largely to the battle of the doctors. What exactly were the medical experts disagreeing on that allowed the jury to be swayed?
This sounds like a classic case of confusing the jury with technical jargon.
It is. The prosecution argued that the blow to the head was inconsistent with the fall itself. It must have been inflicted by a weapon, probably a blunt instrument, implying premeditation.
Okay, that seems straightforward.
But the defense's medical expert countered that determining the exact time and sequence of injuries in a fall from a height onto a hard surface was, well, scientifically dubious. They argued the head injury could have been sustained during the fall or even before the fall from some earlier untreated injury or accident.
So one side says blunt force trauma caused the fall. The other says the blunt force trauma was a consequence of the fall. If the experts can't agree, the jury just defaults to reasonable doubt.
Precisely. And the prosecution's case was fatally weakened by their star witness, Muriel Turney, Tom's wife.
What did she do wrong?
Muriel testified that Bella was paying Tom blackmail money and was visiting him at night to hand over the funds. But Muriel herself was described as an hysterical subject. Her unconcealed hatred of Bella just worked against the prosecution's case.
So she wasn't a credible witness.
Not at all. She undermined her own claim by admitting that Bella's payments were often trifling, a few pounds here and there. That's hardly the action of a victim paying a massive blackmailer, especially not for someone like Bella who just inherited a significant annual income.
The jury must have looked at Muriel, seen her overwhelming emotional bias, and just immediately dismissed the financial motive she was offering.
They did. And the defense, led by the very astute Sir Godfrey Wenham, brilliantly focused on the key piece of physical evidence: a button. A button found in Tom's clenched hand. This button came from a cardigan that Bella had given to Muriel. The defense argued, very compellingly, that this button must have been planted by Muriel herself.
So they weren't just proving Bella's innocence. They were actively suggesting Muriel was the culprit, or at least that the evidence was completely unreliable.
It was a strategic masterpiece. Sir Godfrey suggested that the sentimental, naive country policeman who had been left alone with Muriel for a brief period after they found the body had allowed her the opportunity to plant the button. He said she capitalized on her apparent grief and hysteria.
So since the button linked Bella directly to the scene, and Muriel hated Bella,
Planting it would be a logical act for a desperate wife. The jury, already suspicious of both the expert testimony and Muriel's hysterical presentation, felt compelled to acquit.
and the prosecution, realizing their hands were tied, later lamented that they couldn't introduce the suspicious death of Aunt Flora by grated carrot.
Right. They couldn't use it as evidence of a powerful pre-existing pattern of behavior and motive. If they had been able to connect the two deaths, Bella would have almost certainly been convicted.
The acquittal of Bella for Tom's murder was the ultimate, albeit temporary, victory for the conspirators. Bella then supposedly commits suicide because of intense public gossip.
But as we know, the diary ends right before the death. The narrative cover story stops exactly when the real crime begins. The whole trial, as Mrs. Bradley realized, was built on multiple nested deceptions: the identity of the victim, the source of the poltergeist, and ultimately the identity of the person pulling all the strings.
Okay, so let's follow Mrs. Bradley as she picks up the pieces of this supposed suicide. She never bought the story that Bella, a calculating killer who had just escaped the gallows, would take her own life over a little neighborhood gossip.
It just didn't fit the profile. So she sends her accomplice, George, to take snapshots of the current owner of Nonsuch, Miss Foxley, who's claiming to be Tessa, Bella's surviving sister.
And this is the moment Bella's great deception is finally unmasked.
It is. Mrs. Bradley first visits the Vicaret Pond, which is the village where Bella supposedly drowned herself. She shows him the snapshot of the woman she spoke to at Nonsuch. The vicar immediately identifies the woman in the photo as Tessa Foxley.
Okay, so he confirms the name she's using.
He does, but he adds a crucial detail. He recalls the deceased Bella having fair hair and a nice complexion, unlike the current woman's gray, greasy hair and spotty face.
But the vicar is confused, right? He just remembers two sisters, Tessa and Bella, and he's simply applying the current occupant's name to the photo he's seeing. Mrs. Bradley needs ironclad proof of who the living woman really is.
And she gets it from Eliza Hodge. She travels back to the village where Aunt Flora lived and shows Eliza the same photo. Eliza takes one look and instantly identifies the woman as Miss Bella to the life, except she looks that much older.
The physical identification is confirmed. The deception is revealed.
And the incredible truth is that Bella Foxley faked her suicide using her sister Tessa's body.
That is utterly cold-blooded. How did she even manage to get her own sister's body for this faked suicide?
Tessa was the perfect victim for the ruse. She was known to be weak, thin, and had suicidal tendencies, and she lived near that isolated pond. It's likely Bella either engineered her death or just capitalized on Tessa's state to make the body available.
So Bella assumes Tessa's identity, buys the Nonsuch house,
Using the inheritance money she got from murdering Aunt Flora.
and now she rents it out as Tessa Foxley, making money off the very ghost stories she helped create.
And there's a small, morbid detail on the headstone that confirms the deception.
What's that?
The headstone for the deceased Bella listed her as 45 years old. However, according to the date entries in her own diary, Bella should have been 48.
So she aged down her deceased sister's profile by 3 years. Why?
Probably to better match Tessa's known age, or maybe to make the death seem more tragic and less suspicious. A younger woman buckling under public pressure. This elaborate identity swap was designed to allow Bella to disappear from public scrutiny, distance herself from the murder accusation, and secure her financial stability.
The identity swap is an amazing revelation. But the deepest, darkest secret is still lurking in the background. Those two missing boys from the Shafton institution. We started there, And now we have to connect Bella, the murderer and fraudster, to Piggy and Alec, the forgotten victims.
The connection comes via Larry Lawrence, a young seaman and former inmate of the institution, who eventually trusts Mrs. Bradley enough to talk. He confirms that the cook housekeeper, Bella Foxley, got the boys' files to break out, helped them saw through the window bars, and then hid them in the kitchen during the initial search.
So Bella was the inside accomplice the warden suspected all along.
She was. And Muriel Turney, Tom's hysterical wife, confirms the setup under pressure. This wasn't some random act of kindness by Bella. It was the entire foundation of the poltergeist fraud.
She needed the boys for the scam.
It was pure exploitation. Bella brought the runaways, Pegwell and Kettleborough Piggy and Alec and none such. The whole intent was to use the children to fake the hauntings for Tom's psychical research profit. Tom was making money writing sensational articles about the phenomena.
And Bella was capitalizing on the increased property value and rent potential from the house's infamy.
Exactly.
The boys weren't paid, were they? They were essentially being held hostage.
That's right. Muriel confirmed they were getting nothing except their food and somewhere to sleep. Bella leveraged her knowledge of their escape, the threat of turning them over to the police, to keep them in line. Their mischief-making powers were weaponized for adult greed.
So the displaced calendar, the ringing bells, the overturned bedroom, even obscene writing on the walls, it was all a coordinated operation run by two scared, delinquent children hiding in the shadows.
Precisely.
So, if the boys were the poltergeist, how did they move around the house undetected while all these researchers and Bella were upstairs chalking rings around the furniture?
Mrs. Bradley investigates the house again and finds the precise mechanism of the hauntings. She discovers the well in the courtyard with footholes deliberately carved into the brickwork, leading down to ancient, damp cellars beneath the house.
A secret passage. That explains everything.
It was a perfect system. A trapdoor could be accessed either from the kitchen passage or the back stairs, which didn't have doors. This allowed the boys to move silently beneath the floorboards. As Mrs. Bradley astutely observed, this explained why the ghost could always be somewhere else, which is, the essence of a good game of hide and seek.
So the sudden, inexplicable noises, the quick displacement of objects.
And crucially, the cold air that spiritualists often experience during their seances. That cold air was just air currents rising from the damp, ancient cellars below. The supernatural was nothing more than sophisticated criminal stagecraft.
But the operation ended, not with the police, but with tragedy. The hauntings stopped after Tom's death. The police, acting on Mrs. Bradley's suspicion, investigate the cellar floor where Muriel had been seen doing some suspicious gardening after Tom's inquest.
And that's where they find the true horror.
The bodies of Piggy and Alec.
Yes. They were found buried, indicating they died by starvation, neglect, or other foul means, and they were interred quickly before decomposition could fully set in. The timeline confirms that they were killed after the poltergeist operation had ceased and after Tom's death.
This shifts the entire focus again. If Tom was dead, and Bella was in jail awaiting trial for Tom's murder at the time the boys must have died, who buried them?
It only left one person who was still active at the house during that critical period and had been observed doing gardening near the courtyard well entrance.
Muriel Turney.
Muriel Turney. The case is now a vast web, moving from Bella's initial greedy murder of her aunt to a triple murder conspiracy rooted in this poltergeist fraud, culminating in the death of two children.
So the trail of bodies leads directly to the person who appeared most victimized by the whole affair, Muriel Turney. The hysterical subject who testified at Bella's trial was, in fact, the one who delivered the fatal blow to her own husband.
This is where we have to reconcile the two faces of Muriel. She was presented as fragile, hysterical, emotionally volatile, but she was also calculating enough to commit murder and frame a rival.
What was her motive for killing Tom?
It seems complex. He had likely discovered some of her own criminal activities, or, more dangerously for her, he was about to give evidence that would ruin their shared income stream from the fraudulent hauntings. Tom was the public face of the poltergeist. If he exposed Bella, the entire financial arrangement would just collapse.
And Tom was vulnerable after that first non-fatal fall, which gave Muriel the perfect opportunity to deliver the final, fatal blow to his head, making it look like a tragic repeat accident.
And she was calculated enough to ensure Bella took the blame entirely.
With the button.
Yes. She admitted under pressure that she planted the button from Bella's cardigan in Tom's clenched hand during his second fatal fall. The defense team at Bella's trial were right. The evidence was planted. They just misidentified the planter as a confused country policeman rather than the victim's own wife. Muriel used her apparent hysteria as a shield to commit a cold-blooded framing.
And the double murder of Piggy and Alec. Muriel was also responsible for their deaths.
She confessed that she, with Bella's temporary assistance, locked Piggy and Alec in the secret cellar after Tom died. She was terrified that if they were caught, they would testify about the poltergeist fraud.
And implicate her and Tom posthumously, destroying any chance of her collecting residual income or maintaining control over none such.
Exactly. So Bella's crime regarding the boys was assisting in their confinement, but Muriel's crime was the abandonment and willful neglect that led to their starvation and death in the cold, damp dark.
The boys were just collateral damage in the cleanup of the fraud.
It is a horrific detail, but it's key to understanding the depths of Muriel's calculation. She wanted them gone, but she didn't want the spectacle of a direct murder. She left them to die slowly, and then, after the inquest into Tom's death was wrapped up, she quietly buried them in the cellar floor.
But despite all this calculation and cold-bloodedness, Muriel had a fatal flaw that Mrs. Bradley knew exactly how to exploit.
A deep, ingrained superstition.
Right.
This is a brilliant psychological move by Mrs. Bradley. Muriel had mentioned earlier that she feared they might offend something queer by faking the phenomena, that the spirits were kind of sacred. So Mrs. Bradley, having failed to break Muriel through logic or standard police questioning, realized she had to weaponize Muriel's guilt and her fear of the supernatural.
So Mrs. Bradley stages a second, genuine haunting at Nonsuch, designed specifically to break Muriel's mind.
She returns to Nonsuch with a young accomplice, a trustworthy boy named Bob, who is briefed to act as a poltergeist. Mrs. Bradley first engages Muriel in conversation, deliberately setting a trap. She mentions that she had advised Bella to remind the court where Muriel was and what she was doing while the boys were starving.
That panics Muriel.
It does. She rushes back to the house.
The atmosphere must have been terrifying. What happens when Muriel enters the house?
The psychological manipulation begins immediately. Mrs. Bradley has Bob produce these initial low-level ghostly sounds from the cellar first, a high-pitched mouth organ. Muriel initially dismisses it, shrugging it off as fairies or small rodents. She's trying to rationalize it, sticking to her familiar, controllable forms of superstition.
But Mrs. Bradley knows she has to hit her with the specific trauma of the boys' final moments.
Exactly. The final sound is the cue. Bob produces the distinct, horrifying noise of a coffin lid being screwed down.
Ooh, wow.
In reality, it was just Bob screwing down the cellar trapdoor from below, right over the spot where the boys were buried. That specific mechanical sound, the sound of final confinement, was the precise auditory trigger for Muriel's guilt.
That is the moment everything breaks. That noise must have been absolutely deafening to her conscience.
It was. Muriel, consumed by guilt and believing the boys' ghosts were seeking revenge for starving them, completely lost control. She started shrieking, "They're here! They've come to be revenged on me!"
And then she attacks Mrs. Bradley.
In a desperate final act, fueled by terror, she tried to kill Mrs. Bradley with a razor, but was quickly disarmed and arrested. This psychological collapse led to a full, unburdened confession about murdering Tom and the calculated starvation of the boys.
A stunning victory for psychological forensics. Muriel's guilt, amplified by her deep-seated superstition about the very phenomena she had helped fake, achieved what months of traditional investigation couldn't.
And this final reveal casts a really crucial light back on the genesis of the whole mystery, the diary. Who wrote this piece of protective fiction, really?
We initially assumed Bella wrote it, trying to cover her tracks with Aunt Flora's death. But Mrs. Bradley suspected the style was too refined for Bella's background as a housekeeper.
Mrs. Bradley's final assessment was highly persuasive. Bella Foxley, though clever and calculating, did not seem to possess the sophisticated literary style of the diary, the unexceptionable prose.
So who did?
Given that Tom Turney was a professional writer who made an income from articles and journals, it becomes highly plausible that Tom himself fabricated the diary.
Tom wrote the very document intended to protect the woman who would eventually be framed for his murder by his own wife.
It's the ultimate irony. Tom likely created the diary, perhaps even starting before Aunt Flora's death, as a protective narrative around Bella's actions. He wanted to establish her as an innocent, objective bystander in case of any scrutiny over the inheritance.
And he likely wrote the final entries, ending on March 19th, to cement this narrative before his own death.
Perhaps completely unaware that he was about to be eliminated by his wife, who would then use that very diary's existence to suggest Bella's guilt. The diary, intended as a shield, became the roadmap to the entire conspiracy.
We started this deep dive with a single suspected murder and an apparently simple suicide. But after methodically peeling back all the layers, we've uncovered one of the most complex chains of crimes rooted in insatiable greed, deep-seated resentment, and the willingness to exploit anyone, even vulnerable children.
Let's just quickly recap the sheer complexity of this tragedy.
Right.
First, we had Aunt Flora's death by, of all things, a poisoned grated carrot orchestrated by Bella Foxley for her inheritance.
Right.
Second, there was the murder of Tom Turney by his wife Muriel, who then coldly framed Bella using a planted cardigan button and her own feigned hysteria.
Third, the poltergeist activity at Nonsuch, which was not supernatural at all, but a calculated, fraudulent operation run by two runaway boys, Piggy and Alec, exploited by Tom and Bella for profit.
And fourth, Bella's elaborate identity swap, where she faked her own suicide, using her sister Tessa's body to escape prosecution and secure control of the house.
And finally, the most horrifying crime of all, Muriel's calculated starvation and burial of those two children, Piggy and Alec, in the damp cellar because she feared they would expose the entire operation.
Right. Bella eventually faced trial for their murder, given her role in assisting their imprisonment, but the primary guilt rested with Muriel.
The ultimate success of Mrs. Bradley's investigation hinged entirely on structural analysis. She refused to accept the most compelling piece of evidence, the diary, as fact.
And by juxtaposing the highly polished literary narrative of that diary against the gritty, contradictory testimony of witnesses like Eliza Hodge and the physical evidence of the secret cellars, she was able to systematically demonstrate exactly what Bella and her accomplices had to lie about to create their cover story.
What's so fascinating here is the sheer audacity of manufacturing a primary source. Bella Foxley's diary, which was intended to exonerate her, became the key piece of evidence used to demonstrate her guilt.
And the final chilling thought, thanks to Mrs. Bradley's analysis, is that this entire work of protective fiction might have been authored not by the accused, but by her victim, Tom Turney.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought that extends far beyond a 1941 murder mystery. In our modern world, we rely so heavily on written accounts, from memoirs to social media posts, official reports. How often is the primary source we trust actually a calculated, self-serving deception crafted by someone with a hidden motive?
And when the author is a criminal, what single piece of evidence, even a tiny detail like a grated carrot or a faked age on a headstone, proves to be the most reliable marker of the truth? Think about that as you navigate your own daily stack of information.